Hey everyone, I'm Dave Shultz. Welcome to this panel. I have with me today experts from three different aspects of the supply chain in our industry. We have Rachel Newman with Hanesbrands, one of the brands that S&S Activewear sells. We have Meg Erber with S&S Activewear, and we have Denise Taschereau with Fairware, full service promotional products distributor in the industry that focuses on sustainability and ethically sourced products. We wanted to talk a little bit today about environmental sustainability, corporate responsibility, and what that means in our industry, wherever you sit on that journey. We know that it's become much more of a hot topic over the last couple of years, particularly in the last 12 months. Nielsen recently said that the U.S. sustainability market is approaching upwards of 150 billion in sales in 2021. And we're seeing searches for things such as ethically sourced products, sustainable fashion, et cetera, start to grow in terms of the number of searches actually being done across the search engines and within the industry-specific search engines. To provide a bit more context to this too, I also am fortunate enough to sit on a board in the industry called PromoCares with both Meg and Denise, and our role is to kind of foster and educate people about what CSR actually means and where they can go to find ethically sourced products and things like that. We focus on a number of different pillars within that particular board, and today we're going to focus a bit more about the environmental aspect and sustainability and responsible sourcing and things like that, and that's why we've brought together this panel of experts. I am the least expert on this panel, so you'll hear me speaking the least as we move on, but we have some questions for each of these panelists individually, but we wanted to kind of back up a bit and talk a little bit about some interesting points that came up during a conversation last week when we were preparing for this, in terms of the fact that everybody in this industry and beyond, in the retail world as well, is kind of at a different spot in their journey in terms of CSR, whether it's trying to figure out what it actually means for them or where they are in terms of how much of their company's initiatives are based around these CSR initiatives. So with that in mind, let's back up a little bit and talk about one of the points that we brought up in our conversation last week was this fact that everybody is, in fact, in a different spot in their journey. And Denise brought up a really good point that you have to meet people where they're at. And everybody may be in a different spot in the journey in terms of what this means to them. So Denise, talk to us a little bit about what you guys as a distributor in this industry do to kind of help meet people where they're at and what that means for you.
Dave, thanks. I think that is a really important question. It's something for everyone to consider, whether you're a supplier selling into distributors or distributors selling into brands, is that concept of meeting people where you're at. And we think a lot about sustainability as a continuum or a journey, and understanding that for us as a founding benefit corporation, someone who launched on day one with a mission and a mandate to essentially change the world through the simple act of buying, we go after clients that have a strong position in this market around environment, around sustainability, but not everybody is there. And I think a lot of people want to go there. They're being inspired right now by brands they see in the marketplace. They're seeing organic food when they walk down the grocery aisle. They're seeing mainstream brands start to integrate sustainability into their own offerings. And then they go to work and they call their promotional distributor, and they have the same expectation when they're doing that B2B transaction. And for us, we really want to look at what's important to the client and where are they at. So for example, if we're working, with an organic food client, it's going to be obvious what they might be looking at. But we're always surprised where some of our clients will be passionate about the materials, but they wouldn't necessarily have considered where or how the products are made. We have other clients who are passionate about, say, made in the USA, but they haven't considered what the materials are made from or some of the processes of manufacturing. So we often are educating folks about the big picture and how they can play a role in kind of pivoting or leveraging their spend to drive some change in supply chain and match up their purchasing with their values as a company.
So you're coaching them. I assume you have customers kind of on both ends of that spectrum too, and some probably still that are very cost focused. How does the coaching aspect come into working with those kind of customers and helping them along that journey?
I think there's a few different ways to look at that conversation. The first entry point for us and our sales team is always around quality. Are you looking for a very low cost product and price is your, primary, driver of your decision making? In that scenario, you're going to be looking at, products that maybe have conventional materials. They might not have recycled or organic, but you're going to be trying to bring a brand to bear that has a strong sustainability program internally, maybe around their own energy management or wastewater treatment. So you're going to be looking at brands that have good social compliance frameworks and are still bringing cost-effective product to market. And we have a lot of that in our industry, thankfully. The other piece is really, if people are looking for a more fashion fit, retail quality piece of apparel, it's actually pretty easy to bring a sustainable product or a product with recycled or organic content into that conversation because the price points aren't actually that different. They may have been 5, 7, 10 years ago, but we're finding that gap is closing. So there's a few ways into it, and we'll kind of dig in a little bit more into what customers are asking for, I'm sure, as we go along. But the quality conversation, and then the looking at the brand we're buying from and what are they doing, as opposed to the T-shirt or the hoodie itself.
Wonderful. Rachel, turning to you for a minute, from the manufacturing perspective as Hanesbrands, where are you guys in this journey? How are you incorporating this into both the materials aspect of it, the manufacturing aspect of it, and the education aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important process, and our journey is probably a little bit further along than some other organizations that are out there. We started about 15, 20 years ago and implemented an entire division that was focused on corporate social responsibility. So, not just sustainability, and I think that's really important because, to what Denise was talking about, it's really the whole gamut and the whole picture of everything that we're doing. And I think one of the things we continue to watch this as a macro trend, and certainly don't think that it's necessarily should be titled as a trend anymore. It's something that people are doing every day, and it's part of their decision making process. But for us, it was part of doing the right thing. And corporate social responsibility, again, being much more than just about the product. It's about people, it's about process, it's about a lot of things, including the planet along the way.
Meg, you kind of fit into the two in between what Rachel and her team at Hanesbrands is doing and what Denise and her team at Fairware are doing. So as a seller of multiple brands in this industry, where is this fitting for you guys at S&S Activewear these days?
Well, I mean, I think it's super important to bring up what we're doing from a sustainability perspective. While we're not a manufacturer and can't mitigate our footprint the way that Hanes can, or Bellic Canvas, or any of our sustainable partners, our footprint is really in our warehousing. And so the sustainability focus has really been on our solar energy. We've installed upwards close to about 2,500 high performance solar panels across all of our facilities nationwide. These panels keep us from being powered by fossil fuel, which would expel over 4 million pounds of CO2 a year into our atmosphere. So we're also taking additional steps across the distribution channels and offices, including water refilling stations, recycling stations, and we're actually reusing the packing boxes to reduce carbon waste. And not to mention our grant program, which helps give back to local organizations and community programs. I think what we are going with is that not all of our brands have a ton of sustainable options, but that's only because everyone is at different stages, just like our customers. However, many of the brands that we carry are focusing on sustainability, even if they don't have 100% organic or recycled product in their line. Many of the brands that we work with are WRAP certified and are part of the Fair Labor Association. They've increased their wastewater reduction. They partake in company-wide recycling initiatives, and they're also investing in renewable energy. A ton of these brands, like for instance, Bella, they're dyeing and finishing most of their products in California. They've literally committed to the highest wastewater standards in the world. They use eco-friendly dyes to lessen the ecological risks, and they've reduced their water consumption by less than 7 times the typical apparel manufacturers. And they also have that whole one trash can thing going on. Adidas is making huge strides. By 2024, they've eliminated all virgin poly and they've converted to 100% recycled poly. I believe that we currently carry 76% of that. Alternative apparel, they will be fully sustainable by 2022. Hanes, I mean, I'll let her preach it, but I mean, they have the whole Hanes for good. You can see the life cycle of the t-shirt. It's just amazing. All the collateral that we have to be able to give to our customers, I think it's spot on. And all these partnerships that we've established over the years with our vendors has really kind of come full circle now.
So between all of you, and Denise, I'll start with you because you're closest to the end buyers. What's driving the demand for this? In terms of both demographics and from the verticals and the industries out there, where are you seeing the demand for more emphasis on CSR initiatives originating from?
I think there's a few different places in terms of the verticals. The health and wellness broadly, defined category, which everybody wants into, whether they're kind of legitimately in that industry or not, is a big driver. A lot of brands, whether it's health and wellness in terms of their own product offering or the industry they sit in, or thinking about it internally in terms of the health and wellness of their own teams and their own staff. They're starting to think about these issues. Obviously, any brands that are in retail, any brands you might work with that are working directly with consumers and clients in the marketplace, they're being pushed into considering these issues. So it's important as part of the supply chain infrastructure, as being a partner in their supply chain. We have to bring it to the table. We're seeing employees really drive this. We're seeing obviously younger buyers drive this, and as noted in my previous comments, I think that consumers are seeing more access to information in their retail experiences vis-a-vis transparency. It might be country of origin, it might be ingredient lists or materials or information about the dyes in their products in the retail experience, and they're starting to bring those expectations in their B2B buying channels. But about 20 some odd years ago, I saw someone speak about the 3 key drivers of sustainability, and I've always loved how she framed it. And someone out of the UK, and she talked about mud, morals, or management, and as to what brought people to the table. And the mud is obviously the risk management, having mud slung at you because you're an organic food company, and your employees or your fans or clients take a look at the label in your t-shirt and recognize it's conventional cotton, and they see a disconnect. And I think that gap is what we have an opportunity to close. So that idea of mitigating risk is still a really relevant driver of people to us, and those questions coming in. The other piece is management. I think, Meg, you alluded to this. There's just some good bread and butter opportunities from a management perspective to engage in CSR activities, whether it's minimizing your energy bill, minimizing your waste bill going up to landfill because you're actually getting revenue now for paper recycling, whatever the case might be. But we're seeing people just have good management systems in place, and they want to start to line up all of their spend with those kind of management objectives. And then the final piece is the morals, right? And I think that's where we play most often with our client base, is folks who have a set of values, a mission statement, a corporate social responsibility policy within their organization, and they're trying to line up their activities as a brand with that mission statement, that set of values, or that CSR strategy. And I think this is the most important place for us, is doing that homework, just like any good salesperson would. I'm sure Meg is researching distributors out there before she calls them, researching customers before we call them. Find out what they have. Do they have a mission or a mandate that you can tie this product into, and bring it to them before they ask you? Just start to add it in and say, have you thought of this? We noticed you have a strong CSR strategy. We think we can bring product to you that helps support that.
Yeah, Meg, what about you? Where are you guys seeing the demand coming from, and how has that conversation changed over the last few years?
Well, I just love everything that Denise said, because I don't know if you saw me just nodding my head the whole time, like
Ditto.
nailed it,
Yeah.
nailed it. So I, yes, whenever I go into a new customer, I always look on their Facebook pages or their websites and see what kind of people they are. I feel like social media has really humanized us over the years. So if they're doing eco-friendly stuff and they're preaching it and walking the walk, then it's going to be on their social media pages. And then I instantly reach out to them with like, hey, look what S&S is doing. We're making an impact. And I'll reach out with some specific brands. I go through and see what they're already buying and try to find comparisons. But I have customers coming to me too. Like 2 years ago, I had a customer just give me a call and he was like, Meg, I need your most sustainable t-shirt. And I'm like, all right, I got this. And I'm like, and I'm like, oh, it looks like this alternative piece has about 6% recycled material. Here you go. So I sent that to him. He's like, no, Meg, I need you to think greener. And I feel like that just spiraled into this beautiful thing that we're working on today. And so this is what he was talking about, Meg, think greener. Just because that shirt has 6% or whatever recycled material in it, great. But, what if we have to overnight that shirt? Think about the emissions that are going into the air from that Amazon or whatever, the plane. So we started thinking on the lines of, okay, what are they doing on the back end? Okay. Are they using solar energy? Are they doing the recycling? Are they using less water? And come to find out, a lot of our partners are.
It's been great to see that conversation bubble up, and I love what you guys have been doing there as well. Rachel, what about you guys from the aspect of, say, product offering, R&D, everything? Like, how is that conversation shifting what you guys as Hanesbrands are doing in terms of new product offerings?
hmm Yeah, I mean, I'd reiterate all of these points. I think they're all really, really important. That the consumer and the customer are much savvier today than they have ever been. So, just saying this shirt has something in it organically doesn't really mean that the process that created it, or even the end state process that it went through, to the point that Meg made about overnighting it and the emissions that even come from that piece of it, are being done in a mindset that's sustainable. So that consumer today is just so much more savvy that we have to think about so much more along the process as well, and making sure that everything that we're doing meets all of those standards, and doing the right thing. We think about it from end to end, for sure, as we're looking at products and processes that we have in place against those. There's a lot that we have already done in our supply chain and in our factories to do that. Meg talked a little bit about wastewater management. We have great wastewater management, and in the regions that we're in, we put the water back into the system cleaner than it was when we brought it into the facility. We have things in place that, in our plants, there's no chemicals that can come into our facility unless it's gone through a process prior to that. So we make sure that literally, we're not doing any testing or anything, even of chemicals that might not meet our compliance needs inside of the building. That we're doing all of that prior to bringing anything in the building. So there's a lot of those things that we already have in place. But I think the point was made earlier that the younger generations are much more conscious of this, right? And I think we talk a lot about millennials and how millennials are there, but if you look at Gen Z, they're even more that way, and it's really just part of their life. And it's something that, at Hanes, we even like to say this whole process and journey is really just part of our DNA, because it's really becoming part of society's DNA, and they're thinking about the whole end to end process of things, and how it's being manufactured, and not just that end product has organic cotton or it's hemp, but it's much more than that.
And we will circle back to a question about millennials and how you all are addressing their need for this in a little bit. We'll come back to that. Part of the conversation we had the other day, we talked about how the call to action, the information out there is not always completely transparent or easily findable, for that matter. But we also talked about how the younger buyers, the Gen Zs, the millennials, are much more savvy when it comes to these things. So, Denise, like for you, what is your call to action for both the suppliers, the manufacturers, and even your peers in the industry as well?
To Tell your story. And I think there's different stories to tell. And that's something that we dug into. We always look for some sort of kind of narrative, some sort of why do we sell these folks, right? Almost all of our suppliers, we try to come up with just a little short paragraph, couple of paragraphs around what they are doing, whether it's just in-house, recycling, energy management, et cetera, or whether it is about a product line or innovation within a product line or material. And it's profoundly difficult to find. Something you think would be easy, like country of origin, for example, can be like going down a rabbit hole to get. And I know that can be difficult in apparel in particular, but my sales team spends a lot of time rewriting copy from our suppliers. And I think if suppliers thought about our end users and helped write copy that would help us sell your product and sell your brand and sell your story. That said, I think there's also caution to just having a couple of taglines or bylines about your sustainability efforts without having information to kind of back it up and to ensure that you're authentically engaged in this. And, Meg brought this up earlier, but I think the idea of having, we always call them the geek files, right? So somewhere on your site, being able to drive in and engage in, some deeper content around what you're actually doing, what you're measuring, what you're finding is very useful. But I would say if for us, we love working with brands where we can actually take our end user and drive them to the brand content. So, I'll talk about Hanes because I think they're a really good example. If we have a company who is really passionate about climate, Hanes is, a partner in the Carbon Disclosure Project. They've got an A rating, which is amazing. We actually will send content from Hanes' site or even third-party content or media about Hanes and their efforts around climate to the client. There'll be a URL in the product content. So that's what we're talking about, is help share that content, help us tell your story. And I think one of the biggest observations I have in our industry is I'll find a supplier, a client will have fallen in love with a particular, t-shirt brand or drinkware, whatever it might be, and we'll start to do our research to onboard the supplier. I'll go to the website. There is nothing there. There's nothing around even product safety or basic compliance, never mind anything about their corporate initiatives vis-a-vis social or environmental responsibility. Then I get someone on the phone and I get an earful about the awesomeness that they're all doing, but no one has thought to write it down. So I think, understanding that we want these stories. The other kind of call to action for some practical, tactical tips is, SNS actually, it wasn't you, Meg. We're part of a buying group called Reciprocity Road, awesome group in the industry. And we, in Q4, I think last year, had like our PK with SNS, and I can't think of the fellow's name who did it, but he started the PK talking about the sustainability from efforts from SNS, and then he was rolling out the Adidas line, and he talked about the recycled content, the sustainability efforts for Adidas. And I would say that you need to arm your sales reps with some of these pieces of information. And I would challenge all of you to not let a sales rep do a PK without talking about your sustainability efforts. And even just educating them to that point would help us recognize that it's important to you and get a few of those nuggets that then we can share through to our client base to help them choose you or one of your brands over the other folks. That's what we're looking for. It's like, help us sell with these stories and with this kind of content.
That's
I
a
have
great
to
point.
agree.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Meg, to what extent is your sales team actually armed with this information, incorporating it into? And by the way, I feel I'm half Canadian now because I work for a Canadian company, so I know what PK means, but I know there are a lot of distributors in the United States that don't know that PK stands for Product Knowledge Session, when the suppliers come visit you and talk about their products. So, Meg, how are you guys incorporating that into what you guys are doing when you're talking to distributors?
Well, I love everything she says. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So I think that's what makes a really good sales rep, is we have to tell a story. You want to be remembered. Our distributors have like vendors coming in every single day. You've got to stand out. So they're asking for collateral. They want to be able to tell that story that I'm telling them. Because I come in with so much enthusiasm and I love what I do. And I'm like, check this out. And I can literally just show them all these products, but then I can show why I love them. And then people really like that. They love the energy. So, and when we're talking about millennials, I feel like millennials also want to align themselves with not only brands, but companies, retail and promotional that align with their values and morals. So when sustainability is being such a big thing right now, that it's almost an easy sell when we have it. But again, what Denise was saying is having that collateral, having that story, and being able to give it to them so that they can also tell it. And I think that's what it's about. It's being able to have a really good story.
Rachel, let's turn to you for a second, since we're talking about millennials. As a retail brand, what kind of insight do you have in terms of the millennial consumers and how they're making purchasing decisions when it comes to sustainability, and what can people be doing to appeal to these buyers when it comes to these things?
Yeah, and I'd go back and just add Gen Z to that too, because they continue to be a big part of
Sure.
this conversation and evolve. Both Gen Z and millennials are kind of pulling along with them. So they're pulling their parents along, they're pulling their grandparents along the journey as well. And I think Meg said it. It's part of their lifestyle, so it's not necessarily an afterthought. Which, their parents, it may have been a little bit more of an afterthought for them, or if it was convenient, they would do that. But it is part of their, who they are, and it sets them apart in telling who they are when they align with brands that they know are being transparent in what they're doing. And that's what I think millennials and Gen Z, and Denise talked about this. Transparency is super important as we move forward. And I think that's really the only way that brands will continue to be successful in this space, is to make sure that you're transparent about what's happening. And in order to be transparent, you really have to understand your supply chain. For Hanes, it's a little bit easier because we own our full supply chain. But any supplier that's out there, whether you own your supply chain, or you're sourcing your products, you really have to understand what's going on within that entire network of your supply chain. Even as a self-owned supply chain network, we have to be very focused on understanding all of the parts and pieces and making sure that there's nothing broken along the way, and that we have full control over all of it. So I think that's the biggest thing to the millennial is that transparency, but telling the story. It's when you're out at retail, it's how do you tell that story? You've got to be concise and tell it, maybe on a hang tag. In this industry, we have the luxury of a lot of sales reps out in the field telling that story, for us. So it goes back to I'll go back to what Denise said earlier. We as suppliers really do have to be good about giving all of that information to the market, and making sure that they fully understand it, and that it's very transparent, and the whole story is there. So that's really important to the millennial.
Yeah, I love that at each phase, you as Hanes brand, as SNS, and as Fairware, you guys are each telling the story, but in slightly different ways to slightly different audiences. And we are an industry that has evolved from a technological standpoint in the last few years too, and that has been a challenge for consumers or distributors in the industry that are using technology to find products. The story is not always readily available. I know that through our work with PromoCares, Sage now has some filtration in there where you can look for products that fall into these categories, or for companies that are doing good. At Commonsku, we've recently incorporated some additional fields for our suppliers to highlight things they're doing with PromoCares, or even certifications when it comes to diversity, women, minority-owned businesses, things like that. So it has taken the industry some time for the technology to catch up with the good that everybody's doing at various points in the supply chain. So great to see some of the stuff and hear more about it. Denise, let's circle back to something we chatted about earlier, but give us a sense of the types of customers that you're working with that are actually asking for this, because it's not always obvious. It's not always the green focused companies that are asking for these. So what type of customers are you guys working with that are actually asking for these type of products now?
I mean, there's obviously people in our portfolio who it's a core driver of their business. So we work with Patagonia, we work with Ben and Jerry's. The conversations around product sourcing with them always include issues around supply chain diversity, ethical sourcing, sustainable materials. One thing they don't interestingly include is no one ever talks about compliance. Compliance is very 5 minutes ago with kind of leading brands in sustainability. So that's not enough anymore. I think what's more interesting for us and the trend we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years is what we would call more conventional companies coming to us and asking us for some pretty deep sustainability metrics or information. And I'll give you a couple quick examples. We're a licensee with UCLA down in California. And in our initial conversations, they're asking about whether we know where the regions the cotton is grown for the t-shirt programs that we're looking at. Worried about the way our human rights issues in China, for example. We haven't had a lot of people ask us where the cotton is grown in our t-shirts, whether they're conventional or organic. And there's a university that's starting to ask those questions. Another good example would be in a meeting with someone from the sustainability team at LinkedIn. And a surprising question in our first meeting was whether we could bring to the table suppliers who are able to disclose their carbon footprint, or what's called tier 3 emissions reporting, so that they can map their carbon footprint as a company all the way through their own operations, into their vendors' operations, into their vendors' suppliers' operations. So us being able to turn again to somebody like Hanes, who actually track and measure that data and publish it, is very helpful in the sales conversation. And I bring those names forward because I think often a lot of our peers in the industry think, oh, I don't sell to clients like that. But you might be surprised that some of the clients that you wouldn't think of as sustainability thought leaders are actually moving on this and moving on it quickly. So I think as an industry, we need to get ready. We need the systems in place. We need the technology in place to share information. And I think we need the will to move in this direction as an industry and kind of step up and step into this kind of sharing and transparency around what we're doing and how we're helping our clients achieve their mandates and their goals. So.
Shifting to price for a second, Rachel, help us understand a little bit about how price has changed, both in terms of the cost of produced sustainable products, as well as what customers are asking for and their ability to afford it. How has that shifted the conversation around both your product selection and how you guys go to market with these type of products?
Yeah, I think the conversation continues to evolve in the marketplace. And historically, when you thought about a sustainable product, it was product focused. So it was, certain segments of that, certain types of cotton, that drove that price and that cost up. But we continuously do research in the marketplace, and the majority of U.S. consumers will say yes, they want a sustainable product. They want something that's got, a CSR focus to it. But oftentimes, then when you attach price to that, they're not really willing to pay more for the product that's sustainable by nature. So, what we've had to do is we have to think about that and make sure that, again, being a good steward of the planet, that we're considering every aspect of it. So there are ways to, throughout the entire process, make sure that you're being sustainable without saying, the cotton is organic, or it's hemp, or something that's more expensive. As we've gotten further into producing things with recycled plastic, for example, it used to cost us a little bit more to do that. Now today it really is fairly equivalent in how you produce that product with a recycled poly versus a traditional poly. So there are ways to make sure that we're going about it, and making sure that we're delivering value to that consumer. And it goes back to also the whole cycle of it, right? So it's educating consumers on, this product might say that it's organic or it's hemp, but the whole process behind it really wasn't sustainable. And that's what we look at, is the good that we can do in a big mass scale, by doing it right the whole entire process through, and making sure that we do deliver value to that consumer at the end of it.
Meg, what about you guys as SNS? Like, how has price changed as an objection in these conversations? And really, what are some suggestions you have to distributors out there looking for selling more eco-friendly options, to current or new customers?
Well, I think price a lot of times comes into it. And I think more so back then because technology now has just surpassed, like, I think when Rachel was saying the the tooling, the machinery, the logistics behind it has become more sustainable. Therefore, making a trade T-shirt just more sustainable. So, yes, is it a nickel more probably now versus maybe $10 more 5 years ago? And I think that is a big difference in why we're seeing a lot more people requesting it, because it's more affordable as well.
And
To
before we,
add, just to add one comment in there around the customer conversation is, have the courage to say to your customer that, maybe the question is, what is, isn't, I'm going to just say that again. Maybe the question you want to start asking your customers is not so much what's the price of the t-shirt, but what's the value of your brand? And change the conversation, right?
yeah,
It's I think that's where we need to get a little bit more courageous, is engaging our buyers into supporting the kind of brands and companies that meet their values, right? And just having those explicit conversations. I really support the notion that the price gap has changed significantly in the last decade, between sustainable and conventional product. And I think people care as much about what the company's doing as what threads are in the t-shirt, and you have to be able to sell both. You have to be able to, bring both stories to your customer.
no, I agree. And I think the common misconception historically has always been that recycled, sustainable, whatever it might be, always has to cost more. It doesn't always have to cost more. And at the same time, the stories involved and the quality of the product itself have become a much bigger part of the conversation. So for all three of you, really, what do you really see as the future of sustainability in our industry?
Well, I
Meg
want
wants
to
to
go back
start.
really quickly. Yeah, sorry, just back on price. I think when you sell on price, people expect you to have that price. And I think you have to get out of that mindset of selling on price. And then I think it eventually, like we've been hitting on this whole time, is that everybody's in different stages of this whole sustainability movement. And, where you're like, well, how much does it cost? Okay, well, what is the value in it? And I think that was my little comment that I wanted to add to that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. It's a perfect point. Value to an increasingly large segment of our industry, value has become equally as important, if not more than price. So it's always good to hear that. Sorry, I was trying to wrap it up with a nice little bow by asking each of you what do you see as the future of all this in terms of sustainability in our industry? Both, we'll start with Rachel from the manufacturing side, and then end with Denise on the consumer side.
Yeah, so I've said this multiple times, and many of us have, but increased transparency. I mean, it really comes down to that is that increase in transparency and the ability for manufacturers to really tell their full end to end story. I think is where it's heading, because as you look at, what is Gen Z looking for, what are millennials looking for, and there's probably about 70% of that population today that is really engaged in this discussion, and they're not going to be happy with any brand who doesn't bring transparency to it. And I'd say, 10 years ago, or probably even 5 years ago, for us, it was not hard in the sense of we knew we were doing right, we knew we were doing good, but I think it was always a little bit scary to come out with that story, and tell the story in a powerful way. And the other thing that we looked at it is, is it organic enough in the sense of the way that we're telling it, and getting other people to tell that story for you is sort of what we relied upon versus telling it ourselves. And that truly, Denise has talked a lot about this in the conversation, but that really is what it comes down to. We have done things like created our website Hanes for Good to be more transparent, but I think even in what we've done, there's definitely room to continue to be more transparent. And put goals out there in front of us and make sure that the consumer understands that we don't think that there's an endpoint to our journey in this, that there is always something more that we can be doing. And those goals that we put out in front of ourselves, whether that's zero waste or improved water treatment facilities or whatever it is, that there's constantly a better way of looking at and doing things in the future. And that's I think the biggest thing that consumers and customers are going to ask for.
Great. Meg, thoughts?
Yeah. I really like what Denise said earlier about making it easier for the distributors to sell the product by having this information on each product or each brand, or having maybe just a separate part on a website where we can highlight the brands that are doing something just on a sustainability sustainability level. And I also think because of that pressure that we're going to be putting on other brands, I think we'll find that more brands are going to want to jump on board and start providing those types of statistics and facts and what they're doing, and really jump on that movement. So I really feel like that's going to be the future. I feel like we're going to have a lot more brands to be able to offer. I think a lot more brands are going to want to jump on this sustainability train, because I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
No, I think you're right. And I think you guys have done a great job of highlighting some of the aspects of the brands that S&S carries. So kudos to you and your team for doing that. And to Rachel's point, having that transparency all the way across. So the ability for you to send your customers to the Hanes site without any of the concern that historically has plagued our industry about, sending your customers to the manufacturers, and for Denise, sending her customers straight to the suppliers. But yeah. So, and Denise, you too. I mean, you guys are always extremely transparent about the manufacturers you work with. What are you feeling in terms of the future of sustainability in our industry and CSR as a whole?
I think it's quickly becoming table stakes. And Rachel alluded to this, where it's just becoming a consumer expectation. So we don't want to be caught on our heels as an industry. I think I look often to the product compliance work and the product safety work that's been done over the last, say, 15 years in the industry as a good roadmap of an industry where, to be blunt, compliance, product safety was sometimes aspirational in some of the sectors in our industry. And as a whole, the industry has embraced it, built toolkits, coaching, education, and sort of made that like a normative behavior, don't break the law. I think sustainability is going that way. And we do have frameworks that we can adopt as an industry. We've seen it work in other areas that we've needed to address as an industry. And I think that in the next sort of 5 years, that all the suppliers in our space are going to have to step up and bring their story to the table. And if they don't have a story, they're going to need to start writing one. And there's a lot of different areas you can, pick off as your first chapter. But if you don't have a story, I'd say start sharpening your pencils as a supplier, and enable us to get at it and share it when you do have the time and the courage to write it. So it's coming, I think, is my main message to folks. And I encourage everyone to be ready for it, and support the suppliers who are doing it, and encourage the suppliers who aren't to get going.
I love it. Start sharpening your eco-friendly sourced pencils and writing your own stories.
My pencil. I actually have
Yeah.
a bamboo mechanical pencil right now, and it's making me so happy because I am a pencil person.
We just want to thank everybody for joining this session today. Thank S&S for having us. It was my pleasure to join this panel of experts with Rachel, Meg, and Denise. Obviously, they know a lot about corporate and social responsibility, ethical sourcing, things like that. So it was really a pleasure to hear what they had to say, and we could go on for hours and dive into all these different topics. But we'll wrap things up. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.